from the team. Came down from 5 to 3 now. So our project is the Karnataka State SSLC Board 2011 marks and analysis of that. So for us it was easy since we didn't have to collect the data, it was given to us. Just a brief idea of the statistics, also that there are 34 districts in the data. They don't correspond to the actual administrative districts, but these are school districts. Around 12,000 schools and 855,000 students in the SSLC. We have various things like the student name, caste, gender, marks, subject, total score, and then these are like all subjects. And then at the school, in the same line, we have school name and district, school district, etc. Okay. And then the tool that we use for visualization is something called Many Eyes from IBM Research. I just happened to find it, and it's a bit flaky sometimes, but. So this is just to kind of start off, we can scroll down a little bit. So this is school ranks by district. Unfortunately, I guess the tool lets you only seems to let you use some kind of graph for certain data. So I had to use this. It's not appropriate. So this squiggles, the trends don't mean anything because these are all just individual districts. So if you start from here, this is the top 8 percentile of the schools, and then this second and third and so on, right? Add up to 100. So Chikkodi basically is the district that has the best schools. I mean, most schools in the top 8 percentile and so on. And then it comes down to Yadgir. And all the districts are not shown, but Bidar and Yadgir, generally you will keep seeing them in the corner. Yeah.
So you can't visualize this using something like the heat maps and other things?
I mean, it doesn't have heat map. We'll come to it. I mean, only 3-4 things worked actually for me, and then I tried to use them. The most appropriate wherever possible. I tried to avoid this because these things give the wrong impression of some flow as such. But so then there's a lot of data. Like for example, we have all the marks in different languages, medium of instruction, caste, etc. So we decided that we will basically look at the total marks and marks in mathematics and science. Basically to avoid a lot of issues about medium of instruction, because if you're looking at maths, English performance for example, then a lot of things matter which shouldn't matter so much in mathematics and science. So it's kind of easier comparison. Okay. So we ignored the other subjects. And we looked at the performance at the district level obviously, but then rural versus urban, government versus private, and boys versus girls, and so on. Look at a couple of examples. So this is a mass distribution. So we can just scroll down. So this one is the total, all the districts together, the whole state, and these are some districts just to show that the same kind of pattern holds. And these big peaks are 30 and 35, which are pass marks for SC/ST or on some category of students, and then this is for the general category. And then there are smaller peaks at 40, 50, which are, it's kind of expected, normal sort of distribution. Right? So, then if you have any questions, just hold on and we'll come back. Okay. Then we look at the first, major categorization of rural versus urban. Now, how do we identify rural schools and urban schools? So we took a simple way of identifying it. We looked in the address and looked at taluk. For example, if I have a Bangalore school, we don't say that it's in Bangalore taluk or whatever, right? So or PO, etc. So this gave us about 7,300 or 61% rural schools, and the rest of them are urban. So we used something called DISC, which is a government database, which is slightly different from this because they include private schools, CBSE, not private, but CBSE, ICSE, and all the schools. So their numbers are usually a bit higher than what we have. So we look, for example, Udupi. So what we have in urban and rural using this is 10 and 234, 10 urban schools and 234. They have about 51 and 230. So this is probably accounted for a lot of the CBSE and ICSE schools or international schools, whatever it is. So we felt it's quite comfortable with what we have. And another example is Dharwad. There again, you will see this number is higher, but these are fairly close. And both data have a lot of errors. For example, we have Malaysian schools listed as rural in the DISC database. So none of them is very reliable. So this is basically what it is. Once you know that, we can look at that. So this is a distribution of, what is this? So this is the total marks versus that is the variation between rural and urban. So you can see that the range is between actually 90, very close to 90 and 110. So it's kind of an equal distribution. In some districts, the rural schools are doing better. You can just, and the size, this is the size, the number of students that wrote in that particular school. So the big circles would be normally Bangalore South, Bangalore North, etc. Right? So you can see some are right at the 100, very close. So there's not much variation in the sense.
Sorry, what's the y-axis?
This is the basically in this plot of this the rural
Percentage of
total score per district of the rural students versus the urban students. So that basically in some districts rural students are doing much better means 5 to 10%, and in some districts urban schools students are doing much better. Okay, so there's, I would say it's kind of not very interesting, nothing major. Similarly, we took for government and private schools. So to identify this, we looked for government, GOVT or government or corporation, which gave us about 34%. Again, it validates fairly well with what we have. Because the DISC gives you also detailed counts per district of government schools and aided schools, unaided schools, which all come under private for us. Okay. So here you will see a lot more variation. So here again, this is the total score, and this is the government versus private. So you can see a huge range. So if you just show some of the outliers, so if you interestingly all the urban areas, Bangalore South, show the other ones. This, Bangalore North, and then this is Bangalore.
Okay.
So these are the major urban areas. The government schools are performing very poorly. There's like 25% difference between the government and the private schools. And at this end, it's very close, 98%, where there isn't much difference. So you can show some of these.
But there are no places where the private schools do worse.
No.
It's very interesting.
Okay. And then this range, of course, this would be typically a leader. So, and these are Chikkodi and so on. So we will post all that so you can just take a look. But basically, the idea is that the rural versus urban is not so bad compared to government versus private. There's a huge difference. This 25%, 75 to 78, these three, and even these 50 or 85, still big gap, 15%. Then we did a lot of comparisons based on gender. So this is given in the data, so we don't have to identify by name or anything like that. Okay. So a lot more boys, about 10% more boys write the exam, and the scores, obviously girls typically are expected to do better, and they do 10% better. Okay. So some interesting things, if you see average science mark and maths mark, there's about 3.5 marks difference. But one interesting thing is if you take out all the students who failed, if you remove them, the difference comes down to 1.5. So we'll show why it is when you look at the distribution. Okay. These things are sort of hard to see. Do one at a time. So not just the percentage, don't show the numbers. Yeah. So this is the percentage of boys who failed by district, and you can see this is a very poor district that is in Yadgir or Bidar. So 60% boys failed. But if you see generally, it's about 30%. 29 or something is the average, 8 or something is the average. Right? So this is the different districts. Actually, okay,
Girls will same thing.
click there.
So you can overlay the
Yeah, so you can see girls percentage always the reddish color is lesser in all the districts. So, no, again, nothing interesting in this. So we will go to the other previous one. So here, this is showing again, sorry, it's for the wrong graph as but this is the different districts, the performance in maths. This is actual performance. This is about a 3.5% difference. It's shown here as a 3.5 marks difference between boys and girls in various districts. And if you take out the people who failed, the difference comes down to 1.5 marks. And in some cases, even the boys have outperformed.
So could you again do the same thing at the other end? So if you look at the people who have done really well.
Yeah, we can slice in that. But this tells you, this also, if you look at the graph, we will see why that is also. So we can go to the next. Yes. So we'll just show. So here, this is this bottom one is the girls, and this is the boys, and this is the total distribution. This is the total marks. Okay. Ignore the peak. We'll come to that next. So here, if you see that this is about the 210 line here, which is the pass mark for 6 subjects. So you can see a lot more boys fail here. So this area is all extra boys that failed. This is girls, and this is the whole thing is boys. So a lot more boys failed, as we saw. But here, if you see, I mean they're equal almost. So that's why if you take out this part, the percentages are much closer. So now we'll come to the very interesting, the most interesting thing. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So there's a huge peak here at 219 exactly. I mean no, and at 218 there's a dip. So till here it comes fine about 208 or something. And then this is the number of students who got this particular score, like 0, etc. And the two smaller peaks at 35. So people write one subject also. So those records are also there, and they pass. I mean they're given pass marks is 35 and 70. 70 is for people who wrote 2 subjects. So there's some sort of logic is there. Then it goes up. So obviously people scoring like 200, etc. Till here it's going in a particular way. And then suddenly there's a dip, and then it goes to 4,000, from 900 to 4,000 at the score of 290. And we have kind of looked into it quite a bit, and we can't really find an explanation. So some of the things we are looking, if you get the previous year's data, to see is there similar peak and is it exactly at 290, then maybe there is something worth looking into further.
How about 3 minutes?
Yeah, so let's just go back to the. Okay, so then we looked at various districts. So these are the individual districts for graph. So you just change the district and so most of them will have a peak there. You can see the dip and then the peak. Just show one maybe Udupi or something. Some of them don't have either. The better districts will have a performance where the peak is actually much higher. There they don't have a peak at 290, so they have, it's a different kind of distribution. But majority of the districts have a peak at 290. And these are also boys and girls also have the same particular. So you can see here very nicely which district is this.
This is
Total, okay. So we already saw it. So then we also looked at schools, ranking schools by their total score or various things like that. So this is this is like slicing and dicing into various private and urban, private and rural, government and urban, and government and rural. So government and rural would be at the bottom. So this is government and urban. Government and urban and rural. So just do one at a time.
Government and private.
So this is urban schools. This is the larger ones are private, and this is the government.
What's the
This is the percentile. So 12,000 schools divided into 12 sets. I mean, the top 8 percentile and next 8, and so on. So this is the actual number of schools. Just can you just do one? Just government, urban. So if you see here, this is what it's sorted out. So if you see this is the top 1,000 schools. Just highlight this. This is 2 or something like that. So 7. Sorry, this one first one. So there are 7 government urban schools in the top 1,000 in the state, and it slowly increases. And then now let's go to government rural. Okay. So here also it's government rural is here, 13, and then slowly increases. So
this is much more like a bell curve than the
but then with private, they have much higher. Obviously, the top 1,000 somebody has to fill it, so they're mostly private. Then, so this is what we were showing, the peak at 290. So it goes from 911 at 218 to 4,188. Right? And this is true across boys and girls and across most districts, except for some districts where the average mark is much higher. The distribution is much more to the right. There we don't have this. So we didn't show this one, but so next steps, we plan to compare some of these results against the previous year's data, which Anand is going to give us today. and then look at all these kind of trends in the previous year's data to validate these such observations. That's it.
So one thing I think I don't know whether it can be addressed automatically or whether it is to be done manually, depending on how much time you have, is to answer questions like, what's the best place, what's the best district in the state if you're a girl who wants to study science? Right?
That's the
So
best.
those are just conjunctions, right? So you just have to do Boolean queries on the data.
No, we already have it. It's there right here in this data, but that's across the whole district. But then see, the districts are fairly large entities. So, but we can say which is the district that's performing the best in maths and science and so on. And one of the interesting things which I didn't show but I made long back is that there's a difference in maths performance. Similarly, there should be in science as well. Some districts, compared to their overall mark, they do. I mean, let's say maths score should be around 15% of the total score, but it varies from 16 to 14, 13, and so on.
I mean, from a storytelling perspective, so
Yeah.
for example, suppose you were to write a story out of this. The best, most interesting story would be if that 219 panned out across years.
Right.
You wouldn't necessarily know why, but at least you should be able to.
Yeah. So we can throw out some interesting
Right?
hypotheses.
But otherwise, I think if you were to rewrite it in a storytelling mode, you would have to say, oh, here is how it looks like in Karnataka, and therefore, what should I do if I want to make sure that my child does best? Right? And those are the kind of things that people will find.
Well, see, a lot of things that we find here are pretty well known that private schools are better than government schools. But
Actually, that's not true.
that is true. But rural versus urban is not so true. So in a sense that, for example, there may be a perception that if I move out of the city and go to a smaller town, then the education is not so good. That is not. I mean, or to a rural area even. That's not necessarily true. But one question there is that really nobody seems to have a good idea of how do you define a rural district versus rural school versus an urban school. For example, if I build a new international school, it'll be in some PO or some taluk probably from here. So now does it make it a rural school? It is not. So you really have to, some of those categorization results are hard to identify. Like for example, you had an idea of by MLA constituency, but practically it is impossible unless you sit and collect the data in that format.
But one should be able to do that. So those are kind of like, if you add zip codes, if you cross-correlate it with other kinds of geographical information, potentially one should be able to do those things. So whether it's a Lok Sabha constituency or a zip code or any of those.
Can I attempt to get that data? Last year, this is of these schools, there will be a lot of people that are interested in this. Key reference. Another thought is government schools are more trying to ensure that a lot of people are educated as opposed to people educated well. And a couple of questions might be interesting to look at there. One is to see if whether in rural areas, for instance, the government schools are in fact performing that function, or is it that even there the private schools are really doing
How many students they are serving in each in the urban and rural government versus private schools?
Precisely. Now, by and large, the number of government schools is higher by a factor of 2, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. Question is, does that ratio increase when it goes to rural areas, and if so, by how much? So, if overall it's 2:1, in urban areas, I expect that it will probably be 3:1, and in 1:1, and in rural areas probably 3:1, something like that.
No, overall it's 1:2. Yeah.
Correct, in favor of government schools. The question is, in rural areas,
No, sorry, in favor of private schools. There are 4,000 government schools and 7,000, 8,000 private schools.
Okay, that's the one. So, in any case, does that ratio tilt in favor of government schools
In rural areas.
to rural areas, and to what extent is one question. Now, of course, if that is done at an aggregate level, that becomes somewhat less interesting analysis. But one can go down especially to district level.
Yes. Yeah.
And also, district population data is reasonably easily available.
Right.
Keeping can start correlating and say that are there specific districts that are underserved, either by the combination of government plus private or individually. There is another data set called DICE, which provides infrastructure data.
Have you seen that?
Seen that actually.
So you have access to that.
Yeah. That's what we are doing the validation against.
Now, the trouble with DICE is correlating as merging the schools from one to another is a bit of a feedback. But at least at a district level, a similarity analysis from see data same thing
But,
what I told you.
so we looked at what there. I think one of the things could be that if the facilities are improving, then does it also correspond with the increase in performance? So over time, as a snapshot, facilities won't really help us much, probably, but
No, not from a facilities perspective, purely from are they serving the schools perspective, because here with the marks data you get the number of students which may not be the same as the capacity. So maybe that there's space for 1,000 students in one school and only 50 are used for whatever different kind of thing. So which may also then answer the question, here's a district where the percentage of enrollment is lower, but the capacity is higher. So the problem is not capacity, the problem is just people not coming to the schools or the schools are not getting
Two things. One is to look at the, when you look at the difference between districts, so say if you look at a district like Udupi versus some of the other backward districts of the state. One of the sort of factors that affects performance is also how much the state spends on education in its district, and that is different in the sense that you find that districts like Udupi, for instance, which have traditionally been performing better, continue to draw a larger share of the state percentage, whereas actually it should be the other way around. That's one thing. The second thing about performance and difference between government and private is that, again, in favor of performance as opposed to serving the needs of education. And I don't know whether this data is going to be available at all, but many private schools ensure that when they take students from 9th into 10th standard, have a very high rate of failures in 9th. So they only take students into 10th standard whom they feel pretty sure, because they are all hoping and aiming for 100% results, which the government schools
that they can't.
cannot and won't do. So that could perhaps
That
explain
is-
this huge
So
difference.
again, that one of the things would be to track between earlier classes, but then the data is not there, so really
Yeah.
difficult to say, that can. But it's good. I mean, we all know that we would like to send our kids to schools that are performing well, so that's why we are looking at it from that point of view. But then yes, it's a complicated thing as to what. Yeah, if I select the best students, my school performance is likely to be better than others anyway.
In fact, you might find that the demographics in 9th and 10th and other standards changes, right? People shift schools quite often after 10th. So, I mean, I don't know if we can get to that data somehow. But, okay.
I don't know if this was already covered, but the distribution of marks by subject can be quite an interesting thing to look at. What we found is, for instance, within a school, some students tend to perform well in most subjects, barring one. Like if you were to just take a pattern of performance of
Within a school?
just take an individual school.
Yeah.
Now, a student could be, if you just take the student's rank in each subject across the school, the state, whatever, then, but typically I look at it from within a school perspective. So, there tend to be certain kinds of patterns. A student is consistently performing well in all subjects. Student is consistently performing poorly in all subjects. Student is consistently performing middle in all subjects. Student performs well in most subjects, but poorly in just one subject, or the other way around. At least in Tamil Nadu, when I've seen this data, whenever this happens, the subject that most often happens to be the extreme is Hindi. The name of the student also gives some clues, most likely from the north. That's all. So I'm just wondering if perhaps a pattern of subjects could be looked at to try and and see how this.
We should look at the bigger schools where there's maybe at least 50 or 100 students, because some of them are very small.
But it doesn't have to be in school level. It's maybe what are the kinds of patterns of marks. So for instance, if you simply said one pattern is people scoring high in every subject except for one subject. Now that one subject, is it most often any given subject?
So we did, I had mailed about it, but one of the first things I looked at was variation in the math performance as a percentage of the total score. So we saw that some districts are doing much better even though their overall score may not be great. But in maths they are doing better than in the other subjects compared to other schools. For example, Coorg and Chikballapur, which happen to be mountainous districts. So there the maths performance was low, and I still have I want to talk to somebody who is interested in maths teaching in Karnataka. So I will try to get an idea if there is some logic that we can look at other languages as well at the district level.